10 Dumbest Criminals in World's History. From jailbreaker trapped by the hole in the wall around his midriff, to drunk burglar falling asleep under victim's bed, here is countdown on 10 dumbest criminals in the world. Number 10. Mark Smith. Dozy burglar fell asleep on duty. It's never a good idea to break into a house when you're tired. In 2007, Mark Smith broke into a home in northern England while the owner was out and rifled gems from a jewellery box, and helped himself to a checkbook, but the vodka and Valium he had already downed that morning was taking its toll. Hours later, stunned Mrs. Stevenson returned home and found Smith sound asleep under her bed. She could see a pair of legs sticking out. She shouted and shook the defendant but got no response. Police were called and found Smith still asleep under the bed. They could not get any response either when they tried to take him. Officers eventually managed to drag Smith, wearing a rucksack, had fallen asleep on a checkbook and still clutching a stolen pair of gold earrings in his hand from under the bed. The 18-year-old Smith of Wark Avenue in North Shields was jailed for 18 months after admitting burgling the house in Whitley Bay and a neighboring property earlier the same morning. Number 9. Klaus Schmidt, the deaf robber. In August 1995, Klaus Schmidt tried to rob a bank in Berlin by walking in with a pistol and demanding money. So far, this is pretty standard for a bank heist. However, as the robbery progressed, the bank employees noticed that the criminal was acting rather strangely. At one point, one of them asked the robber if he needed a bag, and he replied, "You're damn right, it's a real gun." This made them realize that Schmidt had a noticeable handicap. He was deaf. Taking advantage, one employee set off the alarm. Schmidt remained oblivious. Even while the incredibly loud alarm was going off and the police approached the bank, the robber remained calm and patient, occasionally spouting threats. When the police arrived, they quickly took the criminal into custody. However, Schmidt found a way to turn a negative into a positive. He tried to sue the bank for exploiting his disability. Number 8. Ruben Zarate. Call me and I'll rob you. In 2008, 18-year-old Ruben Zarate wanted to rob a muffler shop in Chicago. He entered the store armed with a gun and demanded money. But there was a problem. Most of the money was in the safe. Only the manager could open it and the manager wasn't in. Ruben decided that he would try again later. To save himself some time, he left his cell phone number with the store employees. That way, they could call him when the manager returned. First, however, the employees called Chicago police. Police arrived and instructed the employees to call the robber, and Zarate returned to find officers waiting for him. They engaged in a brief shootout, and in the end, Zarate was arrested. Number 7. Zachary Tintoni. Identity crisis. Robber Zachary Tintoni broke a basic rule for any crook: leave nothing behind that can identify you. Even a fingerprint or strand of hair can lead the police to a suspect. Sometimes, though, the criminal makes it almost too easy for the cops. Such was the case when a Boston robber snatched a woman's wallet and left behind something that belonged to him: his birth certificate. The man stole a wallet containing $40 in cash and the victim's ID. However, during the struggle, he dropped 2 bags of his own. On the very top of one of them was his birth certificate, identifying him as Zachary Tintoni, a 26-year-old resident of Southington in Connecticut. As if that weren't enough, the bag also contained a letter from the robber's mother addressed to him. Tintoni apparently realized his mistake because when police contacted him, he tried to pretend he was someone else. This was futile as the victim identified him immediately. Number 6. Mgonga Mgonga. Carjacker couldn't drive. In 2013, Melissa Peters was getting ready to take her son to school. She was heading for her car when she found a gun pointing at her face, courtesy of 17-year-old Mgonga Mgonga. He had little interest in the mother or her child, who fled quickly. Instead, he simply entered the vehicle to steal it. There was only one problem: the car had a manual transmission, something with which Mgonga was unfamiliar. What followed was a scene straight out of Mr. Bean as Mgonga turned on the lights and the windshield wipers trying to make his escape. A neighbor called the police. It took them about 8 minutes to arrive and find an empty car sliding gently into the neighbor's yard. knocking over the fence. After several minutes of failing to move the car more than a few yards, Nganga had decided to make a run for it. Police officers went after him on foot, probably out of a desire to make things fair, and had no problem catching up to him a few blocks away. At least he avoided a weapons charge, as the gun he used turned out to be fake. Number 5. Derek Mosley. Bringing a bat to a gunfight. Would-be robber, Mr. Derek Mosley walked into an Oregon gun store a couple of years ago, armed with a baseball bat, used it to smash a glass display case and tried to grab a gun. There was just one problem. Mr. Mosley may have had a bat, but the manager of the place had an entire store full of guns. Of course, he only needed one. He had his gun pointed at the suspect and kept him in his sights until deputies arrived. Number 4. Unknown robber. Handing over the gun. Grand larceny is quite the stressful endeavor, so robbers are bound to make mistakes. It gets even tougher when you set your sights on a prominent target such as the Halifax Bank in London. This particular robber probably should have aimed a little lower. He entered the bank with a gun in one hand and a bag in the other. He demanded that the cashier give him £700,000 in cash. So far, so good. Next, he planned to hand over his bag, so the teller could fill it with money. Instead, he got mixed up a little and gave his gun. A brief pause followed. It took the robber a few seconds to realize his mistake. The teller, too, was understandably confused. The robber tried to grab his gun back, but the bank worker had the presence of mind to back off and point it at him. Even so, the robber still managed to make a run for it. He didn't go away empty-handed, as he pedaled off on a bank employee's bicycle. He may not have been the brightest of criminals, but he's been smart enough to not get caught, as his identity is still unknown to this day. Number 3. Dennis Hawkins. Bearded cross-dressing robber. A good disguise obviously needs to hide your true identity, and needs to be inconspicuous so you can blend in with the crowd. The disguise chosen by Dennis Hawkins, a 48-year-old Pittsburgh man who decided to rob a bank, failed on both counts. His disguise consisted of a woman's blonde wig, a pair of fake breasts and clown pants. The first problem was that the get-up revealed his face, which was captured on CCTV surveillance. You might guess that Mr. Hawkins wanted to fool people into thinking he was a woman. In that case, he should have considered getting rid of his mustache and goatee. The second problem was that his disguise was not exactly inconspicuous. Right after police released a description to the public, a gas station attendant called to report someone sporting that unique look while trying to steal a car. And as if the man were not noticeable enough, when police arrived, they found Hawkins covered in red paint from a dye pack exploding in his face. Post-robbery, he tried to mug a woman and get away in her car. But she just ran off, taking the keys with her. Number 2. Matthew McNally and Joey Miller. Marker pen masked men. These men were behind likely the worst and least thought-out disguises in the history of crime. When committing their misdeed, they didn't use the masks, hoods or balaclavas typical of most criminals, but instead chose to draw on their faces with permanent marker. While it may have made them hard to recognize during the crime, permanent marker is, as the name suggests, notoriously hard to remove, which left the men extremely easy to identify when the police were looking for the culprits. The dumb stunt earned the duo the nickname Dumb and Dumber. Number 1. Rafael Valadao. Dumb prisoner gets stuck. Rafael Valadao gets stuck in his own wall hole during stupid jailbreak in 2012 at a jail in Ceres, central Brazilian state of Goiás. The well-built tattooed convict tried to follow one of his smaller fellow prisoners who had already made a bid for freedom through the gap. But he was left screaming for help when he became wedged while others tried to force him through the hole they had made with a metal shower pipe. He was left with his upper body hanging outside of the prison while he was trapped by the hole in the wall around his midriff. After badly injuring himself trying to pass through the hole repeatedly, the prisoner realized it was an impossible proposition. That's when he began to scream and cry for help. He was rescued after firemen smashed through the rest of the wall and was treated for a suspected fractured rib. They were 4 inmates in his cell, and one of the prisoners who had successfully broken free had climbed the 15-feet prison wall and was never recaptured. Thanks for watching. subscribe for more.